Have you ever met a man who gives everything, his time, his tenderness, his soul, and still ends up discarded like yesterday's news? Not because he was cruel, not because he didn't care, but because somewhere along the line, he stopped being a man and started being a mirror. Let's call this what it is, a crisis of masculinity. And no, it's not just about muscles or money or macho posturing. It's about emotional addiction disguised as love. Carl Jung warned us decades ago, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. In today's world, men don't just avoid themselves with booze or drugs. They escape through approval, through her affection, through her smile. You think addiction means needles and bottles? No. The modern man's drug is her attention. He chases her replies like morphine. He waits on her validation like oxygen. He calls it romance. But it's not love. It's sedation. Because deep down, he's not chasing her. He's running from himself. That's the dark irony. He wakes up, checks his phone, not for news, not for purpose, but for a text from her that tells him, "You still matter." And every time she doesn't respond, it's not just silence, it's withdrawal. He gets shaky, he gets anxious. He replays their last message like a junkie looking for a fix. And all the while he tells himself, "I'm just in love." But love doesn't collapse your identity. Love doesn't make you beg for confirmation of your own worth. This is emotional dependency. And Carl Jung would call it exactly what it is, a refusal to suffer consciously. Because when you can't sit alone with your fears, when you can't face the boy inside you who still aches to be seen, you'll cling to anyone who offers you the illusion of completion. But here's the brutal truth. The man who abandons himself to be chosen is never really chosen. Because women don't crave a man who clings. They crave a man who stands. She doesn't recoil because you're too kind. She recoils because you're too empty. And the moment you hand her your identity like a gift to unwrap, she drops it. Not because she's cruel, but because it was never hers to carry. And now you're confused. You were vulnerable. You were honest. You gave her everything. So why did she pull away? Because the energy of need repels. Because you turned love into a lifeline. And now she sees you not as a man, but as a reflection of her power. And no woman respects her own echo. Carl Jung once uncovered a dangerous truth buried deep within the male psyche, that every man carries inside him a secret image of woman, not a real woman, but a symbol, a reflection, a ghost. He called it the Anima. She is your inner feminine, your hidden longing for emotional completion. And unless you recognize her, unless you integrate her, she will possess you. You won't fall in love with her. You'll fall in love with what she awakens in you. And that's where the trap begins. You meet her. She's beautiful, soft, radiant, where you feel rough and restless. And in that moment, something ancient stirs inside you, a whisper from the unlived part of your soul. But instead of turning inward to explore that feeling, you make it her job to complete it. She becomes your therapist, your priest, your reason for waking up in the morning. Not because she's earned that place, but because your inner void needed to be filled. He doesn't love her, Jung might say. He loves the missing part of himself she seems to carry. You project your unloved boy onto her, your hope, your need, your pain. You hand it all over like sacred scripture and beg her to read you whole. But she can't. And the more you expect her to save you, the more the energy shifts from polarity to pressure. Suddenly, she feels it. That weight, that need, that silent plea baked into every good morning text. It's not love, it's emotional outsourcing. You have handed her your center and whispered, "Please hold this. I can't hold myself." And now her biology kicks in. She starts testing you, not out of malice, but instinct. She pulls away, she becomes inconsistent, not because she wants to destroy you, but because she's asking, can you still lead when I'm not easy to follow? And if your answer is to collapse, to chase, to over-explain, to spiral in anxiety. You don't confirm your love, you confirm your dependence. And this is where the anima possession becomes lethal. You mistake her coldness for betrayal. You call it heartbreak when in truth, you never loved her. You loved the feeling she triggered. She became your God, your salvation, your mirror. And when she cracked, so did you, because your identity was never inside of you. It was inside her reflection. This is the root of the suffering Carl Jung warned about. The man who refuses to reclaim his own soul will chase it in others until they run. So what happens now? Do you keep chasing the ghost she awakened? Do you scroll her feed like a shrine? Do you beg the next woman to validate what the last one couldn't? Or do you do something harder? Do you turn inward, not to destroy the anima, but to meet her within? Because until you do that, you'll always need someone else to make you feel whole. And no woman wants to carry a man's soul for him. Not because she's cruel, but because it's simply not her burden to bear. What happens when a man hands over the steering wheel of his emotions to someone else? He may still look strong on the outside. He may still hit the gym, speak with confidence, make people laugh. But inside, there's no frame, no anchor, no center. Carl Jung warned about this collapse. He called it the disintegration of masculine structure. And in today's world, it's happening everywhere. Because men have been taught that to be open is to be lovable, that to be vulnerable is to be magnetic, that the more they share, the more they'll be seen. And yes, there is truth in emotional transparency, but only if it's grounded in sovereignty. The weak man misunderstands this. He treats his emotions like currency. He confesses before he's earned trust. He overshares not as strength, but as a cry for rescue. He thinks love means spilling every dark thought, every insecurity, every fear, and he calls it being real. But what he doesn't see is this, that realness without resilience becomes a burden. And no woman stays attracted to a burden, not because she lacks compassion, not because she doesn't care, but because her biology can feel what his psychology ignores, that he's asking her to carry what he refuses to hold himself. Every anxious message, every desperate just checking in, every please don't leave panic spiral, it all teaches her one thing. This man's emotional world is not his own, it's mine now. And instinctively, almost unconsciously, she starts to recoil. She tests, she creates chaos, she becomes confusing. Not out of cruelty, but because she wants to know, can you still lead when the path is unclear? And when he can't, when he folds, fawns, or freaks out, the polarity dies. He becomes emotionally feminine. He leaks instead of holds. He reacts instead of responds. He explains himself into weakness, thinking clarity will fix connection. But it never does, because she doesn't need every detail of your storm. She needs to feel the structure that can hold it. That's what presence is. Not control, not coldness, not fake stoicism, but the calm strength of a man who can sit with his feelings without offloading them. The strong man can say, yes, I feel this. Yes, I'm in pain, but I'm still here, still grounded, still leading. That is what rekindles her respect. That is what awakens her trust. But the moment he collapses into her for rescue, the game shifts, not into intimacy, but into imbalance. And no woman can stay emotionally open when the masculine pole becomes unstable. Not because she's heartless, but because her biology is wired to test the foundation. And when it trembles, she closes, she doubts, she pulls away. Not to punish you, but because something deep in her DNA whispers, this man is not safe to follow. Jung wasn't just talking psychology, he was describing energetic law. When a man gives away his frame, he gives away her safety too. And when there is no container, love spills out. So, what do you do when you've handed it all away? Your center, your stillness, your sense of self. When she became your compass, your oxygen, your mirror, and when she left, she took everything with her. Carl Jung's hardest truth isn't that this happens. It's that no one is coming to save you. Not her, Not your friends, not a therapist, not a new woman. Because this isn't about her. It never was. It's about the man inside you you've forgotten. The one you left behind when you thought, if I just love her hard enough, I'll finally be enough. But you were already enough. You just didn't believe it. You handed her your soul and hoped she'd hand it back polished. But that's not her job. That's yours. This is where the story turns, not into revenge, not into detachment, but into reclamation. You have to go into the underworld of your psyche, not to destroy yourself, but to find the boy you once abandoned, the one who begged for approval and got silence, who tried to impress and got ignored, who made himself small just to be seen. And here's the twist. You don't need to kill him. You need to hold him, to become the man he always needed, to give him the structure, the spine, the presence no one else could. That's not weakness, that's initiation. Because until you meet your own chaos, you'll keep chasing women to soothe it. You'll call it love, but it's really just the hope for anesthesia. And no woman, no matter how radiant, can numb the ache of your unclaimed soul. That work, the real work, is silent, private, sovereign. It begins when you stop looking outward, when you stop needing her to reply, when you stop confessing every emotion as a test for connection, when you stop turning your vulnerability into a performance. You become solid not by suppressing your feelings, but by holding them like a king holds his crown, with dignity, with quiet power. And this is when everything shifts, because women can feel this. They feel the man who no longer leaks, who no longer bleeds through his words, who no longer looks for a woman to make him a man. He's not cold, he's centered. He's not silent because he's hiding. He's silent because he no longer needs to be understood to be okay. That kind of presence, it draws her in, not with manipulation, but with gravity. Because finally, he's no longer ruled by his feelings. He commands them. He listens to his intuition, but doesn't get swept away. He opens his heart, but only to those who've earned the right to enter. He expresses his truth, never at the cost of his structure. And suddenly, he becomes unforgettable. Not because he chased, not because he gave flowers or recited poetry, but because he became unshakable. Women remember men like that, not because they needed them, but because they stood so firmly in themselves, they gave others permission to do the same. This is the shift Jung spoke of, when the Anima becomes integrated, not worshipped. She's no longer your addiction. She's your ally. You're no longer chasing her. You're listening to her within. That's the secret. The strong man doesn't kill his feminine energy. He masters it. And because of that, he becomes whole. This is the moment, the line in the sand, not between you and her, not between love and loneliness, but between the man you've been and the one you're finally ready to become. You've chased, you've collapsed, you've begged for validation from women who were never meant to hold your soul. And now you know the truth. That wasn't love. That was addiction. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's what you've been doing. You weren't unlucky in love. You weren't just too emotional. You were possessed by what you hadn't yet faced. That feeling of emptiness after a woman pulls away, that spiral of panic when she stops texting, that ache that screams, maybe I'm not enough. That isn't heartbreak. That's the echo of the boy inside you still waiting to be seen. And here's where the real transformation begins. You don't numb it. You don't outsource it. You meet it head on. Like a man walks into battle, not to destroy, but to integrate. You sit in the silence. You feel the ache. You stop begging for someone else to hold what you now know is yours to carry. And when you do, you become dangerous. Not because you threaten, not because you dominate, but because you no longer need. You're no longer leaking energy, no longer performing for love, no longer crafting text messages like lifelines. You speak with clarity, not to be liked, but to be true. You walk away, not to punish, but because your soul is no longer negotiable. And she feels that. They all feel that. The presence of a man who no longer craves rescue. You're no longer ruled by desperation. You're no longer intoxicated by fantasy. You're no longer an emotional refugee looking for a home inside someone else's eyes. You have returned to your center. This is the Jungian shift, when the feminine within becomes your muse, not your master. When the inner boy finds his father in you. When the strong man finally says, I don't need her to choose me, I have already chosen myself. That's the man who can love freely, because he's not offering his heart as bait, but as gift. He doesn't collapse when misunderstood. He doesn't explain his pain in hopes of being saved. He doesn't confuse intimacy with emotional dumping. He simply embodies, and in doing so, he becomes unforgettable. Not because he was the loudest, not because he gave the most, but because he remained whole, even when love threatened to split him apart. Let this be your last collapse. Let this be your rebirth. The day you stopped outsourcing your soul and reclaimed it fully. Not because you're heartless, but because you're whole. So here's your choice. Stay a beggar or become a man. Choose wisely. Because this moment, this silence right now, could be the beginning of everything.